Hello and welcome to my video series on the Federalist Papers explained in under 10 minutes. So today we have Fed 10 in 10 minutes. A little bit of background on the Federalist Papers before we get started. The Federalist Papers were written before the Constitution of the United States was ratified. It was during the clash of Federalists versus Anti-Federalists, and they were trying to sway public opinion to vote for the Constitution. They wanted the Constitution ratified. The Federalist Papers were written by three different gentlemen: Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. Alexander Hamilton writing the most of them, which you already probably know if you've seen the musical Hamilton. And they were all written under a pseudonym called Publius, and they were all published in newspapers. So yes, people actually did read these. It was intended to sway public opinion. Now that you've got my little spiel on the background of the Federalist Papers, let's actually dive into the actual meat of the Federalist Papers. So this is Federalist 10, and Federalist 10 is all about factions. So you are going to follow along in your Federalist Paper handout, mark it up, highlight it. I'm going to be sort of explaining it. So this is all about factions. So first of all, factions are small, organized, dissenting or contrary, small, organized, dissenting groups within a larger group. All right, so factions are those groups within the government who are trying to argue for their own self-interest and get government behind their own self-interests. All right, people are arguing against the Constitution because of the idea of factions. And Madison, who is most likely the author of this Federalist paper, says that yes, factions are bad. He talks about the violence of faction. He says that factions are a dangerous vice, okay? And that a cure for factions needs to be provided for in the plan for government. Democracies have in the past failed because of factions, and opponents to democracy have always presented factions as a reason that they don't work. And so he goes on later on in this paper to demonstrate why our government does provide for the dangers of factions. All right, people everywhere complain about them. All right, they say the public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties. Here it is. Public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties, and the superior force of an interest and overbearing majority can then squash the rights of the minority. So factions can sway the majority. An overbearing faction can sway public opinion, resulting in an overbearing majority ignoring minority issues. This is not what we want to happen, but yes, he does say that these are known facts and that they are, in some degree, true. There is some truth to that. All right, factions can be very bad. Factions are a bad thing. Factions should not be allowed to take over the government. Okay, and the reason that factions are so bad is because these must be chiefly, if not wholly, effects of the unsteadiness and injustice which a factious spirit has tainted our public administrations. In short, it's because we've allowed factions to go before service to the general public. It's because people act in such self-serving manners. All right? He says there's two ways that factions can be controlled. You can either remove the causes or control the effects. There's two ways to remove the causes of factions, either by destroying liberty or by giving every citizen the same opinions, passions, and interests. In a free society, you can't control what people, what their opinions are. You can't control their fashions. You can't control their interests. Can you control their liberty? Yes, but this is America. We're not going to do that. He says liberty is to faction what air is to fire. Okay, yes, liberty causes factions, but getting rid of liberty just because it causes factions is like getting rid of air just because air feeds fires and makes them bigger. All right, we need air to live. We can't get rid of air just because it makes fires worse. We can't get rid of liberty just because it causes factions. Factions are the natural byproduct of liberty. He goes on to explain how they are a byproduct of liberty. All right, so he connects it to natural rights. All right, he connects it to the natural right of property. All right, from which the rights of property originate. The protection of these faculties is the first object of government. We have natural rights, all right, whether you are a Jeffersonian, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, whether you are a Lockean, life, liberty, property. We have natural rights, and through the exercise of these natural rights, factions form. All right, they are sewn into the nature of man. Okay, man's connection to property, he says, demonstrates how factions form. All right, certain things have divided mankind into parties, and it's given them a mutual animosity. All right, the most common and durable source of factions, he says, is the various and unequal distribution of property. All right, there it is on the bottom of page 5. The most common and durable source of factions, the various and durable as unequal distribution of property. All right, civilization for this reason produces factions, produces a variety of interest groups connected to where you fall on owning property, working the land, and how you fall into those categories. All right. Finally, he says, liberty creates factions, natural rights create factions. We need them. Factions create the spirit of political parties. Faction is necessary. The spirit of party and faction in the necessary and ordinary operations of the government. In short, we need factions to ensure that every viewpoint is represented and brought up in the government. All right? Even though no man is completely unbiased, which would be the ideal, they still have to act as impartial judges as in matters of legislation. So men are going to be part of the government. Men are going to want to act in their own self-interest when they are in government. Legislators are naturally going to advocate for the causes and factions which are most important to them. Okay? So what are the different classes of legislators, the advocates and parties to the causes which they determine? Yes. People are going to be part of interest groups. People's interests are not going to align with everyone else's, all right? And factions are going to act in self-interest. Factions are not always going to act in the public good. And it would be lovely to say that only enlightened statesmen are going to be adjusting these interests, but enlightened statesmen are not always going to be in charge of the government. So how does our Constitution provide for the prevention of factions? All right, we can't prevent the causes of factions. Again, that would either be by destroying people's liberty or by controlling what people think. We can't do that. So how do we control the effects of factions? All right, there's a couple of ways this can happen. All right, if a faction consists of less than a majority, it's supplied by the Republican principle. All right. If a faction doesn't constitute a majority in Congress, then it can be voted out. The people can vote out a minority faction. That's not going to get enough traction to make any real change. So if a faction's in the minority, it doesn't cause much of a problem. And that is one way of controlling factions. Factions that have a majority. How is this controlled? Well, stay tuned. All right, we're gonna head on down to page 9. Now, here he says, a pure democracy who administer their government directly, so a direct democracy where everybody decides on everything. You can't control factions in a direct democracy because it's too small. It's every average Joe that is advocating for himself, and they are going to vote for things that are self-serving. All right. So if we head down even further to page 10, all right, a republic, all right, which is what we're setting up, a Republican form of government, not big R Republican, little r Republican, which means republic form of government. In a republic, you're electing representatives. You're electing the closest thing to an enlightened statesman. You have a small number of representatives that are that are representing a large number of people, and a large number of people are going to want to vote in a representative who advocates for the people. We are going to want to vote in people who want to serve. We are not going to just vote in a regular person that says, I want to fight for students' rights and only students' rights. We are going to say, we're going to vote in the person that says, I'm for everybody. That's who people want to vote in. That's one way of controlling factions. Also, because our government can't be too small, it can't be too big either, it's going to serve a multiplicity of interests. When there are more people in a republic, sorry, we are on page 12 now, because each representative is chosen by a greater number of citizens, naturally, one faction can't be the only thing that representative represents, all right? An evil representative that is a one-issue voter is going to have a heck of a job trying to convince everybody to back their one faction. We're going to vote for the person that represents the multiplicity of interests. All right. Then he digresses here. You can just cross out this entire paragraph. That's not even important. Go on to page 13 here. And he says that it's harder to get a majority faction with a multiplicity of interests in a large populous country. The United States is a large populous country. It's got a multiplicity of interests. And because of those reasons, our republic has it is written right into the Constitution, right there, that factions can be controlled. For this reason, small republics would suffer more. It's more likely that a faction is going to get into government in a small republic than it is in a large republic because of the multiplicity of interests and the unlikelihood that one faction is going to get so much traction to completely control the government. So because of the size of our republic, because of the means of voting one representative for a large number of people, and because we have that propensity to vote out minority factions, that's how factions get controlled in government. That's why they are necessary to a Republican government, but evil factions have the mechanisms in place to be controlled right here in our Constitution. He ends with some examples. You know, he says that a rage for paper money and for abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project, it's going to be really hard to get any traction behind those. And this is why our Constitution is awesome. This is why it should be ratified. I went 3 minutes over 10 minutes. I am eternally sorry, but I wanted to make sure you got everything in there. So that was Federalist number 10. Come to me if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out. The next video in this series is going to be Federalist 70 in 70 minutes. Just kidding. I'll try to get that to as close to 10 minutes as possible as well. So head on over to the next video if that's where you're headed, and good luck. Happy studying.